For today's plenary, for the first one today, we have 3 other members of the Climate Emergency Task Force with us. And they are Yuri, Catherine Sheps, and Michael Pontonen. I'm just going to take a moment to introduce each of them. So Yuri is an experienced cooperative leader who has served our sector in many capacities. He is a past and present CHF BC board member, and he serves currently as treasurer. He has also served as a board member of Rooftops Canada since 2018. He has lived in First Avenue Athletes Village Housing Cooperative in Vancouver for almost a decade, and he serves there as treasurer as well. Catherine has been a member of U Street Housing Co-op, one of BC's smallest, since 2017, and on its board of directors since 2018. She's worked on climate change policy and advocacy and environmental sustainability for the last 15 plus years in academia and through small businesses and nonprofit organizations. She's excited to be a member of the Climate Emergency Task Force and collaborating with cooperators from across the province of BC. And our third member of the panel is Michael Pontonen. He's the current chair of the task force, a past president of the board, and a current member of Ford Road Housing Co-op in Pitt Meadows. And Mike has worked for Van City Credit Union for the last 10 years in analyst and consultant roles and was a green team champion there. He holds a master's degree in the management of cooperatives and credit unions and wrote his capstone research paper on how BC housing co-ops could fulfill the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. He's also volunteered with the BC Sustainable Energy Association. So the panelists all have different backgrounds, but share an interest in conservation and the environment, and they look forward to bringing their knowledge, experience, and enthusiasm to the task force and to this panel session this morning. Before we begin our conversation, I'd just like to remind everyone that we hope you'll let us know what you're thinking. We plan on having time at the end for some questions, but as we go along, please feel free to use the platform features to submit questions, as Katie mentioned, or chat amongst yourselves. We really do want this morning to launch conversations and additional learning. So on that note, I should just mention that we've launched registrations for a new quarterly e-news report on sustainability. If you visit the CHF BC website, you'll find details there and an easy way to sign up. And while you're browsing that page, you can check out the new sustainability sections of the website. We'll be adding more as time goes on. So with those basic introductions and housekeeping attended to, I thought we'd begin with a question for everybody listening in. So as Katie mentioned, we have a poll possibility, and we're going to take a look at that now. And just a reminder to all participants to not use the full screen mode when you're carrying out your participation in this poll. So the question is, do you agree with the term climate emergency? And we've got 4 options for you. The first is a straightforward yes. The second option is it's real and serious, but not an emergency. Third option, it requires attention, but we have other priorities. And the fourth option is, no, it's an overstatement, perhaps of something natural, of something that won't be a problem for Canada. So I'd just like everybody to take a moment, think about what their position is on this question, and let us know. So we'll give a few seconds for people to register their ideas there, and then we will be able to have a look at the results of that poll. So here we go. I'm not sure if that's the preliminary or the final result, but we can maybe close the poll in another couple of seconds. So I can't see in detail the number. It looks like 81% though have voted in the first category that indeed you agree with the, or it's gone up. So even more agree with the idea that we're dealing with a climate emergency, that term makes sense. And I didn't want to bias too much the polling results, so now it's now fluctuating a little bit, but it is a good thing, I think, that the fourth option, no, didn't win, because otherwise the plenary might have been ill-conceived. So at least we have reason to proceed. So thank you very much for participating in that poll. And I think we can move on then to the first question we have today, which I'll initially ask Michael Pontonen to answer. What do we mean by the term climate emergency? We just had people comment that they think that's an appropriate term, but what do we mean by it? Michael?
Thanks, Michael. And let's see if I can convince the other 10% remaining to think of this as an emergency, because it really is. If you Google climate emergency, as most people would, you'll get the following. It's a situation in which urgent action is required to reduce or halt climate change, and most importantly, to avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage resulting from it. So what does this mean? Our environment is a very complex system. We have millions of species across an entire planet. That system right now is seriously out of balance in many areas, and I'll name just a few. Our emissions are off the chart. The planet is warming as a result. I see declining biodiversity. We're seeing a lot of species going extinct. We're seeing way too many plastics in the ocean that animals, fish, and other mammals are eating and dying from, which is affecting both the overall system as well as our food production. And we have uncontrolled waste production in many areas that is seeping into the environment and polluting it. So these changes are at risk of causing irreversible and permanent harm to the planet's inhabitants, us, as well as all the species that live on it, as well as the ecosystem they live in, the plants and other systems. Oxford economist Kate Raworth actually put it really well in her book, Donut Economics. She notes that we're breaching our planetary boundaries. In short, we're exceeding our limits on a planetary level, and it's greatly impacting human beings as well as other species that live on it. So whereas, you remember a number of years ago, we exceeded the cod fishery in the East Coast. Well, now we're starting to overfish the entire oceans, and it is causing a real issue. We're facing an approaching and very near risk that our actions will reach a tipping point where reversing these trends becomes exponentially more difficult and dangerous. And by that tipping point, I mean, it's no longer our actions that are driving these changes. The system will take over on its own. And let me give you an example of what that might look like. When we reach, for example, a critical temperature, and that's guesstimated at an increase of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, so it's not a huge amount, the northern permafrost band of Canada and Russia will start to melt. Now, that's going to release a whole lot of different things. 2017, for example, it released a strain of anthrax that killed over 1,000 caribou. So we're going to see exotic viruses coming out that we haven't seen in a million years, potentially. The biggest thing for climate change, though, is that we're releasing more impactful climate gases trapped in that permafrost. So one example might be methane, which has a warming effect that is 80 times greater than carbon dioxide over 20 years. So if you think things are hot now, once that permafrost melts, things are going to get really hot really quickly. In fact, it'll increase to such a point where global temperature increases in some regions will become unmanageable and unlivable. There's one estimate that year-round temperatures around the equator could reach 55 to 60 degrees Celsius, which clearly human beings can't sustain without significant effort. The other effect of the tipping point is that it can roll down into other systems. For example, the ocean currents known as gyres transfer heat from the equator band to the northern and southern climates. This is one of the things that allows us to grow wine in France, or grapes in France, I should say. What happens is, as this increasing global temperature starts to melt glaciers and other large bodies of ice, we're getting more fresh meltwater into the oceans. That's lowering the salt content, or the salinity, and that in turn will slow down those gyres. It'll slow down that heat transfer. So what does that mean? Heavily inhabited areas like Europe, and I mean all of Europe, including Southern Europe, as well as all of Canada and part of the Northern United States, may be plunged into what we would term today as ice ages, extremely cold periods that would be virtually unlivable to grow crops and so on. Now, one thing that's important to note is that we had a very stable climate for the last 10,000 years. Things have been fairly normal, and it's allowed our human civilization to thrive, to form agriculture, communities, grow population, and so on. Our actions today risk that stability. And if we don't take immediate action to reverse it, those harmful effects will start to compound and those tipping points will be reached. So this is why we call it a climate emergency. It's something near and pressing in a fairly short span of time, in decades, in generations. And you got to be asking yourself, wow, these problems are really big. What can I possibly do about it? The short answer is that these problems have now become so big. It's not a question of what you need to do, but that we all need to do something. We all need to be part of the solution to make this problem, livable at the end of the day.
Thanks, Mike. That's a pretty serious list of things to justify calling it an emergency. I wonder if Catherine could talk now about the same question.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. So the way I think of it, in an emergency, we take action to keep ourselves and our communities safe. We may suspend what we have thought of as normal rules and do what we can with the resources and tools we have available to keep the people and environment as safe as possible. But in an emergency, panic doesn't help. And we may need to be reminded of this sometimes, but very rarely can we save ourselves from an emergency situation alone, right? We need others. We need the people around us. And how we weather an emergency depends on the people, the resources, tools we have around us. I think with appropriate action, care, resources, we can navigate challenges and thrive together. And so for a lot of reasons, while many people feel like a climate emergency requires some kind of a wartime footing language or chaos language or breakdown language, those have often been resonant in popular culture and have some use for some people. I really prefer to think about an emergency as one where, it's time to pay attention and get to work together. Just makes me feel more hopeful anyways.
Thanks, Catherine. And Yuri, I think you're still muted, so let's just make sure the mute comes off.
Hello, everybody. As well, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the question and frame the climate emergency in the context of another challenge we are collectively facing. Society has dealt with many emergencies before, including world wars and past pandemics, and we have usually responded in almost superhuman ways. Indeed, we are currently doing just that in response to the COVID pandemic. What felt impossible a year ago has become doable in our response to COVID. Some of these actions include broad systemic efforts, including massive public investments and the rapid development of vaccines. More localized changes, including increased business regulations, expanding public space, and speaking at a CHF BC conference wearing pajamas. And individual contributions such as wearing masks in public, washing our hands, and getting vaccinated. If we can change our behaviors and habits to meet the challenges of COVID, surely we can do the same to meet the more severe challenges of climate emergency. Author Arundhati Roy thinks about this pandemic as a portal. She writes, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine the world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We could choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Let's walk through this portal, ready to imagine a new, sustainable, and resilient world. Co-ops have fought against improbable odds before, and we always win. We could do the same now if we act collectively to meet the climate emergency head on. Thank you.
Thanks, Yuri. And it was interesting in your response, you mentioned some of the things that we were doing for COVID. It does, of course, trigger the questions that I'm sure we'll have later on about what might we do for the climate emergency. And it also leads me into that second question we have today. Why should housing co-ops work to mitigate the impacts of climate change? And I think, well, we just heard from Yuri. Why don't we hear a little bit more from you, Yuri?
Sure. I'm going to start with one of the co-op principles, the seventh co-op principle, concern for community. And this includes environmental stewardship. BC's housing co-ops have long demonstrated a deep concern for this aspect of sustainability. Indeed, there's no greater concern for communities than the immediate effects and long-term threats posed by this emergency. The co-op housing sector, including CHF BC, has been a strong advocate for needed climate actions, both housing related and beyond. Of particular note, CHF BC was the first carbon neutral co-op housing federation in Canada way back in 2008. It's time for us to step up again. Quite frankly, the sustainability of our housing co-ops is reliant on the sustainability of our planets. Without a livable planet, no amount of government subsidy, investment, or asset management plans will make a difference. The question that I often get asked is, why should local co-ops make an effort as we're only tiny actors on a global stage? The answer, again, returns to the co-op principle of concern for community. The link between the local and the global concern and the climate emergency is evident in the wording of the seventh principle that includes the text, cooperatives work for the sustainable development of their communities. This places the primary emphasis on co-ops for the sustainability of our co-ops and our immediate neighborhoods. But from these roots of concern for our local communities grew our cooperative movement's wider interest in sustainable development, provincially, nationally, and globally. And as we all know, the co-op housing sector has been quite successful at advocating for investment and policy changes at all levels of government, including the local and provincial levels through CHF BC and the Community Land Trust, at the national level through both CHF BC and CHF Canada, and even at the global level through Cooperative Housing International. Thus, we are well placed to advocate to meet the climate challenges of meet the challenges of the climate emergency wherever they occur and at whatever level. I believe that housing co-ops already play an important role in responding to the climate emergency. We offer an affordable and secure way to shift from the sprawl of single-family homes to a more sustainable model of living through densification and reduced energy use and shared amenities and other resources. Going forward, by prioritizing greener co-ops, we can reduce our operating costs, insurance costs, and repair and replacement risks, and ultimately our ecological footprint, all the while creating healthier communities for our members, our staff, and our neighbors. And on a social level, our well-established communities provide important social support systems to deal with climate-related anxiety, depression, and PTSD, as well as the emotional stresses of the ongoing climate emergency, which can affect us all. Thanks.
Thanks, Yuri. And one phrase that you mentioned stuck with me, that the tiny actors, but tiny actors taken together may have big impacts. Catherine, what do you think about this question?
Well, one thing I think is really especially important when we talk about climate change as a global problem is the concept of scale. So it's true that a lot of climate action needs to take place at a scale that's beyond the individual or household kind of level. You know, it's the responsibility of national, provincial, and municipal governments to ensure that their policies and regulations require and enable a transition to low or zero carbon economies. Individual consumer choices alone will not be able to replace, concerted, coordinated government action. But in housing co-ops, we're not alone. We're not individuals. And the choices that a housing co-op makes have a bigger impact because we're not deciding for one household or one family. So the priorities placed on climate change in a co-op have a scalable impact in the same way. And just like government policies impact how we live, work, and play, so do co-op housing policies. Housing co-ops are buildings that can be energy efficient. Co-ops are transportation hubs. And co-ops are already communities that are working together to keep their spaces beautiful and in good shape. We all want our homes to stay safe, clean, and resilient. And co-ops working on climate change can really enable that for their membership now and into the future.
Thanks. Some encouraging elements then in that answer. And Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add to that question?
Sure. Just touching on scale and co-op principles, we're uniquely positioned as housing co-ops to impact and reduce the impacts of climate change. If you look at BC's plan for climate change, it's to reduce by 59 to 64% the impacts of buildings and communities. Canada's building sector right now is the third largest source of emissions. So we're in the housing sector. It just makes sense that we can move the bar on this. Our unique democratic approach, being a co-op, allows our members to make very rapid decisions that would otherwise foil government and private institutions. So we really do have those means through the principles, through our ability to scale that others might not have.
Great, thank you. So we're talking obviously about co-ops, but co-ops are made up of individuals. You're all individuals. You're doing work on the task force and in your own cooperatives. I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about, for the benefit of the audience, the perspectives and experience that you're bringing to the task force, and why did you want to join in the first place? So yeah, Catherine, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thanks. Well, by training, I'm a marine scientist, a marine geologist. That's my academic background. So I take kind of a long view on climate change. I have a lot of experience with that as well. So I also worked for many years on climate solutions at the Simon Fraser University Morris J. Wask Center for Dialogue. And there I really learned, and I took away from my time there, that often the most resonant decisions and the most long-lasting ones are the decisions we make together. On the task force, I think it's also important to say that I'm from a pretty unique co-op. And if we could actually go back one slide if that's possible. Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm from the U Street Housing Co-op. I think we're one of the smallest co-ops in BC, if not the smallest. We are 6 units. We're mostly low-income members in 6 units on the west side of Vancouver. And so we don't have a lot of, we can only raise housing charges so much to take on new tasks or to manage other things. So next slide, please. But that doesn't mean we don't work on sustainability and climate in our co-op. But we do so in a way that's accessible to us. The things that we feel is really important is providing food security for our members by really intensively gardening our land. And as coming from that perspective, I just want to ensure that whatever work the Climate Emergency Task Force does is accessible to all co-ops, regardless of size, regardless of budget or background. Climate change affects all of us, and responding to it democratically and cooperatively will require all of us, all of our skills and strengths, even if they may not immediately lend themselves to some academic discussion of climate change.
Great, thank you. We'll switch gears a little bit and we'll move over to Mike. Comes from quite a different kind of co-op.
So I'm from Pitt Meadows, and that's Ford Road Housing Co-op. We're middle-aged, about 41 years, and we are one of the larger co-ops in the province at 160 units. I've lived there about 10 years now, just about. But I grew up in the BC interior, down from Sun Peak Ski Hill on one of the lakes there, and I've seen firsthand the impacts of climate change over the last 20 years. That shows up in decline in birch, pine, fir trees due to drought and beetle infestations. The winters are a lot warmer and the summers are a lot longer. We saw the first forest fire, for example, in March of this year, which is unheard of. We used to see weeks in January of minus 45 degrees Celsius. Now we're lucky if we see minus 30, and it's a shorter period at that. So that's starting to impact the beetle runs and a whole number of different things. Wildfires. Yeah, I mean, we saw 300-foot flames in Barrier, which is a community about an hour northwest of me, in 2003. That definitely changed my perspective on the world and climate change. Our region's seen historically large forest fires in 2003, 2009, 2010, 2014, and 2018, and that was after decades of nothing that large by any means. The 2018, for example. The BC forest fire season resulted in the burning of 13,000 square kilometers, and that's 1.3 million hectares. The budget that year saw an increase of 58%. So this year's budget for forest fires, or 2020, I should say, was 519 million. So wherever climate change is hitting you, whether it's personally or otherwise, it's hitting you in the pocketbook and taxes. In short, there's a lot of changes that I've seen. I'm 50 years old next year. I have a niece and a nephew. I joined this because I'd like to see them in a world that isn't burning and where species don't go extinct like they are all over the place. I'll leave you with a fun fact here, because I seem to be spreading the good news. The Australian wildfires that took place a couple of years ago there, they killed over 3 billion animals. Everybody saw the picture of the running kangaroo through the flames and so on. So imagine that here. That's a very sobering thought for me, and that's the one I want to leave you with.
Thank you, Mike. And Yuri, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your co-op?
Sure, thanks. I've been lucky enough to live in a green co-op, both in terms of the color of the building and in terms of our sustainability aspects for the last decade, and wanted to have help others have a similar opportunity. Beyond our location and innovative architectural and design features that keep our carbon emissions low, our members also actively demonstrate sustainable practices through things like shared space and resources, including our rooftop garden, which is complete with beehives, edible fruit trees, and on-site composting, and other internal spaces like our book club and our tool workshop. We also work on reducing our environmental footprint through less formal activities, such as baby equipment and toy sharing, kids and adult clothes exchanges, an active buy-sell giveaway Facebook page, and many other initiatives. All this has made me actively aware not only where, but how we live has a big impact on us, both environmentally and socially. On the federation front, I was part of the CHF BC team that submitted the climate emergency resolution at the 2019 CHF Canada AGM. And this endorsed the efforts of individuals, communities, and all levels of government in declaring a global climate emergency. A few months later, I put forth a similar resolution at CHF BC's AGM on behalf of my home co-op. This formalized our Federation's sustainability commitment and led to the creation of the Climate Emergency Task Force that we are representing this morning. Finally, in my role of treasurer as both my home co-op and CHF BC, I've seen how important the impacts of the climate emergency impact the bottom line of operations. Michael mentioned the impact on taxes, but it also includes things such as increasing insurance rates due to floods and wildfires around the country, rising costs of recycling and waste management, and meeting more stringent building codes when building new co-ops or retrofitting and expanding existing co-ops. In short, I believe that our climate emergency response cannot be separated from the activities or operations of our co-ops. We either begin to invest in sustainable practices and processes today, or we will pay significantly more for adaptation, renovation, and rebuilding in the quickly approaching future. Thanks.
Thanks again. Of course, there's so much to say. We want to just make sure we get a chance to have other people talk as we approach the end of our time together. So, as briefly as we can we outline maybe our visions for housing co-ops in these uncertain times and with the uncertain climate? And Mike, you were as negative as anyone has been so far. I just what is your positive vision perhaps of the future?
Yeah, and it's not meant to scare, it's meant to educate in the sense that this is a real challenge. This is something we need to jump in on right away. So really, now let's look at what we need to do. We need to tackle two tasks simultaneously. One is take action against climate change. That is to say, arm everybody in every co-op with the tools they need and the education they need to make a difference. And second, to pitch in to support our members in adapting to those impacts. There's a number of different ways where an increasing heat, for example, will impact our senior members and every member. How can we help with that? So it's really those two tasks that I think we need to focus on.
Great. And Catherine, with your long view, what's in your vision?
Well, my vision is for housing co-ops to be beautiful spaces and sites for low carbon neighborhood resilience. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. So, our housing co-ops are buildings, and they should enable, we should work to enable them, I think, to enable residents to live free of fossil fuels, because the buildings that they call home are energy efficient, they're comfortable. And co-ops are transportation hubs, by which I mean they are sites to which people travel to and from every day, although perhaps less right now in this stage of the pandemic. But co-ops can make choices to help residents and members reduce their car use or provide charging for electric vehicles or electric bikes. I really just believe that co-ops are naturally suited for addressing climate change, because we're already comprised of neighbors working together. And really, that's what climate action means. We've learned this year we're not safe until we're all safe. And by working together with neighbors, we can help build resilience within our memberships. And then beyond that, we can help build a little bit more resilience by modeling our approaches to others. And that's one contribution that I think that co-ops can really activate in planning for climate action. Well, not all climate related actions that co-ops might take will immediately reduce emissions in some really meaningful, calculated way that makes an impact. There are huge amounts of things that co-ops can do to build community and sustainability. Planting welcoming gardens with native plants and shade for people to enjoy for cooling spaces. Community gardens to provide food security for members and potentially beyond to neighbors. Our co-ops can model ways of working together for the larger community and be an oasis for those, even those outside of the co-ops, to increase neighborhood resilience. So I guess mostly I want to encourage co-ops to think of sustainability beyond their walls and to think about the roles that they might play in the fabric of their neighborhood and their cities.
Really exciting, some of the responses in there, and also a good way to connect to some of the things that are happening on those theme sessions over lunch. Maybe we could have people talk about native plants that they're growing in their gardens as well. And Yuri, let's hear what's something about your vision.
To me and to a lot of us, housing co-ops are more than just buildings or social enterprises. They're our homes. They're where we seek refuge, where we find joy, where we celebrate life's milestones and take part in several other important family and community activities. We've seen how the unpredictability of COVID has increased our awareness of the importance of our co-ops as we stay home under orders from our health authorities. They will become even more important as climate emergency brings uncertain but impactful changes to the world around us. They will continue to be a refuge. So my vision for co-op homes is to remain affordable, secure, and resilient places where we continue to find comfort. Like Catherine, I would also like our co-ops to act as examples of what success can look like when we work together against a common solution, or towards a common solution. Many people look to co-ops with envy because of our lower housing costs and a stronger sense of community. My vision is for them to also look at us with envy because of our resilience to the climate emergency. I want us to be models of sustainability for housing everywhere. And while the climate emergency may bring unexpected and unliked changes to how we live, I don't want our sector to be unprepared. While it is unlikely that every current co-op will be truly ecologically sustainable in terms of a net zero footprint, we can all become much more resilient to climate shocks, energy shortage, and policy changes. Furthermore, as I mentioned earlier, the benefits of adaptation do not only affect how our children may live in the future, but how we all live today and tomorrow. By beginning to adapt our co-ops now, we will reduce our waste and its associated costs, increase the reliability of our buildings and systems, so we need less repairs, and less long-term, and lower the cost of long-term building maintenance. We'll improve our members' comfort and health, including during cold snaps, heat waves, and smoke events that have become very common. And ultimately, we'll become more resilient to climate shocks and other unexpected events, including things like COVID. All these will lead to lower footprints, reduce economic costs, and greater member satisfaction, regardless of what the future will bring. I want to take this opportunity. I just want to take this opportunity to talk about an aspect of climate justice and equity. Climate action can provide significant opportunities to advance equity through affordability, improved health, and the new community opportunities. CHF BC is committed to promote and embody equity, opportunity, and a sense of belonging for everyone. This includes striving to respond to the climate emergency with equitable policies and programs that every member can benefit from, regardless of where you live, who you are, or the challenges you face. One of the strengths of belonging to a federation like CHF BC is that it's possible to share the cost of reducing our pollution and increasing our resilience to ensure that every co-op can benefit from these efforts. Every co-op member deserves to live in a home that is comfortable, quiet, healthy, and has low energy costs, no matter your size or location in the province. Thanks.
And thanks, Yuri. We have one last question before we sort of open things up, and we don't have that much time, so maybe we just focus on like a brief answer. What is the task force going to do to make all these visions come true or assist with co-ops? Mike, maybe you could just tackle quickly what your top ideas are there.
Yeah, so I'll speak about education quickly. I think the real key, as you've seen from this plenary, is that climate change is a broader issue than just installing LED light bulbs and solar panels. There's a lot of interconnections, and the adaptation part is also important. We need to continue to have that social fabric, that social structure that co-ops do so well, in order to help us adapt. So it's really about bringing those ideas, thinking in ways that perhaps you don't normally think, and educating you on both the impacts and the abilities, tools, and ways of thinking that might help get us all through this.
Thanks. And Yuri?
Yeah. Well, just a sec. CHF BC has the size and scale to not only activate our climate sustainability in our organization and in our work, but to help you and help co-op members do the same with your homes. In our current strategic plan, the CHF BC board has directed staff to do that. This means that CHF BC is committing to refreshing its operations, its programs, and its policies to meet the challenges of the climate emergency. But we can't do it alone. This is why we formed the Climate Emergency Task Force, and we're looking to it for help and guidance in essential work. I wanted to end my comments with another principle. This one from the Dark Mountain Manifesto by Paul Kingsnorth and Douglas Hine. The end of the world as we know it is not the end of the world, full stop. Together, we'll find the hope beyond hope, the paths which lead us to the unknown world ahead of us. While we face an unknown climate future, We do so with imagination and hope and the strength of a dedicated cooperative housing movement that has yet to back down from a challenge. I look forward to get starting on this work together with you. Thank you, Hojka.
Thank you, Yuri. And Catherine?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is really important that we do as a task force is provide advocacy for climate action. So that can be within co-ops, helping co-op members, as my colleagues have already suggested, helping co-ops members connect to the information they need. Ensure that co-ops that take action on climate change have access to the best technical support, funding, and incentives available through CHF BC programming. And also, as a task force, engaging with external partners, governments, and joining into coalition with other like-minded groups to make sure that the advocacy that CHFBC already does is strengthened and is done together with others, kind of cooperating with other cooperators. And the task force, I think, also can help ensure that when CHFBC meets with groups that hold power, governments, others, that they can advocate effectively for our collective role in delivering climate action and low carbon resilience. And since co-ops are such ideal places to be working on climate change, and since we're in the midst of several interlocking and compounding crises in BC, between COVID, opioid poisoning, housing affordability, we would be remiss as a task force, I think, to not be adding our voices to the chorus of those calling for more co-op housing and more co-op housing members, because we know how important that co-op housing can be in providing effective solutions and responses to all of these crises, because really all of them are about working together collectively. So yeah, more co-ops, more co-op members. That's one of the visions I'd like to advocate for.
That's a good way to end. Thank you. So we are now going to transition to sort of bringing in more of those questions and voices that are in the room today. I mean, we really want to know what's on your mind of the things you've heard so far. What would you think is most useful for you and your co-op moving forwards on action on climate change? And we have a poll, and this one's a little bit different. Let's bring up that poll. This one's going to ask you to actually help us generate a word cloud. So we're going to ask for a couple of words, 1, 2, 3 words, and we'll sort of see this develop as people start entering things. But what is on your mind? What would you like us to focus on? What would be useful? So it maybe takes a little bit longer just to think, okay, what's my key word or phrase? But let's see what people have on their minds, and let's get those things down on the keyboards. So as soon as the results start coming in, let's just share them with everybody as we go along. And Anne, I guess we're going to be a little bit pressed for time, but let's see what happens with this last poll, and maybe there's time for one question or comment as we head out. I know there's going to be a lot of excitement about the morning sessions, a lot of interesting things going on, whether you're continuing on with the climate change discussion or you're looking at one of the other things that are ongoing. And also there are these opportunities that Katie has described to interact with each other and maybe even staff. Let us know what you think and have some very exciting discussions. Of course, like everything, this is only a start. This is not the end of anything. So when you have comments, if you have comments, please send them on to us or to education. We will be very happy to receive your ideas and work on them. So I think we're getting those first words come through, and I see one very large, bold collective action being highlighted. And yes, I think that is really in keeping with our cooperative nature. Oh, and also grants. That's always a popular one. But we'll have to see. There are some things out there. Certainly the CMHC has put forward money, but it's seldom purely for green efforts. They often have other interests that sometimes make it a little bit harder to access than would be great. Sustainability. See, these are all really good for us to hear, and I think we're going to be inspired as a task force to take on what you're saying and move forward with it. So before we run out of time, I should just take a moment to thank all the panelists. So Yuri, Mike, Catherine, I know you've already put in a lot of effort behind the scenes and work for the task force, and of course for the session, thinking about these fundamental questions. And I thank you all for that effort and that time. And let's just see what do we have the final results for for the word cloud. I think it's just gone blank. There we go. So all sorts of exciting things, small actions to take, emergency, promote unification of action on climate, community, but those big three, grants, because we can't necessarily do everything by ourselves without help, sustainability, and collective action, really working on the power of the cooperative movement. And maybe I can just ask, has there been a lot of activity?
There has been some activity in the chat, all right. I was just going to highlight one comment that was made in particular. Derek O'Keefe recently made a distinction on Twitter between climate justice and climate emergency. I think it's important that as a relatively privileged country, we address both. So thanks, Teresa, for sending that in. And I also have one quick question. If just one panelist could answer it, that would be great. How would you advise co-op members to start the conversation within their co-ops? So would any panelists like to take that? We're just at 10 o'clock, so we can keep it as quick as possible.
I can grab that one.
Thank you.
Just in short, I think the nature of the emergency and and how real it is important. So it's really just start the conversation with education, whatever that looks like. You know, call a virtual meeting, put up posters in your elevators, on your message boards. Start the conversation with, this is real. We need to start acting on it. Let's all get together and do it.
Thank you, Mike. And if that's a question that a lot of people have, how to do that, let's forward that, commentary about this is what kind of resources we need, and that the task force may be able to set that as one of their priorities to work on. So we will take on board all the comments that we've got, and we're going to have a record of that, and they'll be kept for the task force to look at. We have a next meeting next week, so we'll get on it early. And thank you all for participating in the plenary, whether panelists or regular attendees. I hope everyone has a great conference today, and I look forward to talking to you either later today or down the road. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.